The atmosphere in the sleek, modern office was tense. The businessman, with his sharp suit and calculating demeanor, sat across from the soldier, his fingers tapping on the polished wooden desk. His eyes were cold, and his voice was calm, but there was an underlying edge to it as he looked at her with contempt. "I'm sorry, but your services are no longer needed," he said, the words cutting through the air like a blade. His tone was matter-of-fact, as though he were dismissing an employee who had failed to meet expectations. The soldier, however, didn't flinch. She sat upright, her posture straight, eyes unwavering. A hint of a smirk played at the corner of her lips, as though she had been expecting this moment all along. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with an unspoken challenge. The businessman leaned back in his chair, his hands steepled in front of his face. "You're dismissed. Your behavior has been erratic, and frankly, you're a liability now. We can't have someone like you representing this company any longer." For a brief moment, the soldier's eyes flickered with a mix of disbelief and anger. But then, as quickly as the emotion appeared, it was replaced with something else, something far more dangerous. "You think I'm a liability?" she asked, her voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. She wasn't asking for an explanation. She was demanding it. The businessman didn't seem fazed. He was a man accustomed to power, to making decisions that others had no choice but to follow. But something in the soldier's gaze made him pause, just for a split second. "I've made up my mind," he said coldly, his fingers still tapping rhythmically on the desk. "There's nothing you can say or do to change it." The soldier's lips curled into a smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. She stood up slowly, her every movement deliberate, her every step echoing through the otherwise silent room. "You really don't understand, do you?" she said, her voice now quiet but full of menace. "You've made a grave mistake." The businessman's eyes narrowed as she stepped closer to him. His initial sense of superiority began to waver. He was used to controlling the situation, to being in charge, but something about this woman, standing before him with an intensity that burned like fire, made him uncomfortable. "Get out," he snapped, trying to regain control of the situation. But the soldier wasn't moving. Instead, she leaned forward, her face inches from his, her breath steady and calm. "You're not firing me," she said, each word deliberate, each word a warning. "You've just made the worst mistake of your life." The businessman, for the first time, hesitated. He had always believed in his ability to control situations, but this was different. He had heard of her reputation, of course, but hearing it from someone else and facing it in person were two very different things. There was something unshakable about her presence, something that made him question whether he had underestimated her. As the seconds ticked by, the tension in the room grew unbearable. His mind raced. Was he really ready to cross someone like her? What was she capable of? Could he afford to make an enemy out of her? But he shook those thoughts away, trying to appear composed. "Do you think your threats will change anything?" he sneered, trying to salvage his pride. The soldier didn't respond with words. Instead, she took a step back, her eyes never leaving his, and a chilling silence hung between them. Then, with a sudden movement, she pressed a button on the communicator on his desk. The businessman's eyes widened in shock as the door to his office burst open. Two figures entered the room, both imposing and stern. But they were not his personal bodyguards. No, they were something else entirely. The soldier turned to face them. "I think you'll find the situation has changed," she said calmly, her voice now dripping with confidence. The businessman's heart raced as the figures in the doorway stood at attention, their eyes locked on him with unblinking precision. "What is this?" he asked, his voice suddenly faltering. "You've made a mistake," the soldier repeated, a dark satisfaction in her tone. "And now you'll pay the price." The figures in the doorway advanced toward him, their every step in perfect sync. The businessman's gaze darted between the soldier and the two figures, his mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. Everything he thought he knew about power, control, and influence seemed to be crumbling before his eyes. The soldier's smirk deepened, and for the first time, the businessman felt a flicker of fear. He had always prided himself on being untouchable, on being the one in control. But this woman, this soldier, had just shattered everything he believed to be true. And as the seconds stretched on, he realized one very eye. The office, once filled with the soft hum of conversation and the bustle of the corporate world, now felt suffocatingly silent. The businessman's mind raced, trying to process the events unfolding before him. He had tried to fire the soldier, confident that his position of power would make her bow to his will. But he had learned, too late, that underestimating her was the gravest mistake he could have made. As he stood there, frozen in disbelief, the two figures who had entered the room remained at attention, their faces unreadable. The soldier, on the other hand, watched him with an almost serene calm, as though she had anticipated this moment for far longer than he could ever imagine. The businessman's gaze fell to the desk in front of him, where he had been sitting just moments before, making what he now realized was a rash decision. But his mind wasn't on the papers or contracts anymore. It wasn't even on his own pride. It was on the woman standing in front of him, the woman who had once been just another face in the world of warriors, but was now something far more dangerous. "Who are you really?" he asked, his voice quieter now, laced with a mixture of curiosity and regret. The soldier's lips tightened, a flicker of something passing through her eyes, something that hinted at the weight of her past. "You don't want to know," she said, her voice low. "But I'll tell you anyway." Her words were almost a challenge, as though daring him to comprehend the full extent of the life she had lived. And for the first time, the businessman found himself listening, truly listening, ready to hear the story behind the impenetrable figure before him. "You see," the soldier began, taking a step back and crossing her arms, "I didn't always work for people like you. I wasn't always in the business of serving anyone but myself." The businessman raised an eyebrow. This was not the response he had expected. The confidence in her voice now seemed even more terrifying, as though she had lived through things that had made her untouchable. "I grew up in a world that didn't care about me," she continued. "A world where survival wasn't a choice, but a necessity. I had no family, no mentors, no hand to pull me up. I had to learn how to fight, not just physically, but mentally. It was either fight, or perish." The businessman shifted in his seat, his eyes narrowing. He had heard whispers of her past, rumors that she had come from a broken home, that she had risen from nothing to become a formidable soldier. But hearing it from her mouth made it real, made it undeniable. "But it wasn't always about the fight," she said, her tone softening for a moment. "It was about understanding the game, the politics, the power, the control. You see, when you grow up with nothing, you learn quickly that no one cares about you unless you can offer something they want. And what I offered was survival. But that wasn't enough. I wanted more." The businessman watched her carefully, hanging on to every word. It was clear now that the woman before him was not simply a soldier. She was someone who had played the game at the highest level, who had learned the art of survival in ways he couldn't even begin to fathom. "And so," she continued, her voice steady once again, "I became more than just a soldier. I became a force that no one could ignore, no one could push aside. And it wasn't long before people like you came into the picture." The businessman's pulse quickened. "People like me?" "People with power," the soldier said, her gaze piercing. "People who think they can buy anyone, control anyone. But what you don't understand is that power doesn't always belong to those with the most money. Sometimes, it belongs to the ones who know how to use their strength, their mind, their influence, in ways you can't even imagine." The businessman's thoughts raced. He had spent years building an empire, surrounding himself with people who followed him, respected him, feared him. But now, standing in front of him was someone who had not just defied his authority, but had lived a life that made her immune to it. She had navigated the world of power and politics, survival and sacrifice, and had come out on top. "But I didn't just fight for survival," she said, her voice now tinged with something deeper. Regret, perhaps, or recognition. The tension in the room was thick, like the air before a storm. The businessman was still trying to process the gravity of what had just transpired. He had made a move, thinking he was in control, thinking that his wealth, his status, and his position at the top of the ladder would be enough to dictate the outcome. But standing before him was a woman who had shattered all those illusions in a single moment. As the silence dragged on, the businessman shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his thoughts spinning. He had made a mistake, he knew that much. But what worried him more was the sense of unease that had settled deep within him. This soldier, this woman, was far more than just a warrior. She was a force in her own right, a force that even his power couldn't easily erase. And that realization, more than anything else, shook him to his core. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper, betraying his growing anxiety. The soldier remained standing, her posture unwavering, her eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made him feel like prey under the gaze of a predator. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Instead, she seemed to be studying him, reading him in a way that made him feel exposed, vulnerable. "From you?" she finally asked, her voice calm, almost detached. "I want nothing from you." The businessman's eyebrows furrowed. "Then why are you still here?" he demanded. "Why haven't you left? You've already made your point." She didn't flinch at his question. In fact, she seemed almost amused by it. "I'm here because I need you to understand something," she said. "And that understanding will come at a cost that will make you question everything you've ever believed about power and control." Her words lingered in the air, and the businessman felt his heart rate quicken. He had heard whispers about her past, the rumors, the stories, but until now, he had never fully grasped the depth of what he was dealing with. There was something about her, something that made her different from everyone he had ever encountered in his world of suits and boardrooms, contracts and deals. "You think you can fire me," she continued, her tone steady, "because you've convinced yourself that your money and influence can buy anything. But that's where you're wrong. You see, not everything can be bought. Some things are earned. Some things are earned with blood, sweat, and sacrifice. And some things," she paused, her eyes narrowing with a quiet intensity, "are not for sale." The businessman felt his jaw tighten. He was beginning to realize that the woman standing in front of him was far more than just a soldier, she was someone who had played the game of power in ways he couldn't even fathom. And worse, she had learned to master it. Her words were not just a statement of defiance, they were a declaration of everything she had endured to get to this point. And worse, she had learned to master it. Her words were not just a statement of defiance, they were a declaration of everything she had endured to get to this point. "You're a fool if you think I'm just some pawn in your game," she said, her voice firm, unyielding. "You've been living in a world where you think you control everything. But there's a difference between wealth and power. Wealth can buy many things, yes. But power? Power cannot be bought. Not by you. Not by anyone." The businessman's thoughts flickered back to the first day he had met her, to the first time he had heard her name mentioned. He had been impressed by her reputation, of course, but he had always believed that no one, no matter how skilled, could stand up to him. His world was one of money, of influence, of contracts that could bend anyone to his will. But here she was, standing in front of him, proving him wrong at every turn. "Your mistake," the soldier said, taking a step closer to him, "is thinking that your money, your influence, could ever touch me. You don't know the first thing about the price I've paid to get here. You don't know what I've been through, what I've lost. You're just a man who thinks he can erase someone with a signature. But that's not how this works. The businessman swallowed hard, his mind racing. What was she talking about? What could she possibly have gone through that would make her so untouchable? Was it just her training, her skills? Or was there something deeper, something darker that she had experienced in her past? For the first time, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: fear. Not fear of losing his fortune, not fear of losing his power, but fear of losing control. The world he had built, the empire he had created, suddenly seemed fragile, like it could crumble at the hands of someone like her. "You're not the first person who's tried to break me," she said, her voice now almost a whisper. "And you won't be the last. But you will learn a very valuable lesson: you can't break someone who has already been shattered." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, and the businessman felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't understand it. How could someone who had endured whatever it was she had gone through still stand so strong? It was as if nothing could break her, nothing could bend her to anyone's will. "You think you can fire me?" she repeated, her voice almost a taunt. "Go ahead. Try. But just remember, when you've made your move, you'll have to live with the consequences." The businessman stared at her, his mind still reeling. She had completely flipped the situation on him, and now, he had no idea what to do next. She was right, he had underestimated her. And in doing so, he had made the most dangerous mistake of all. The businessman's mind was spinning. For the first time in years, he was unsure of himself. The soldier's words echoed in his mind, every sentence a reminder of how badly he had miscalculated the situation. He had tried to control her, to reduce her to just another figure in his empire, someone he could discard with the stroke of a pen. But she had turned the tables on him, exposed the cracks in his confidence, and shown him a side of power he had never truly understood. She wasn't backing down. And that, more than anything, unsettled him. "You're not in control here anymore," the soldier said, her voice cold, but with an undercurrent of something more, something deeper. "You wanted to make a move, but now you have to live with the consequences." The businessman's mind raced. What had he gotten himself into? Who was she really? What was her true agenda? The last few minutes had peeled back the curtain on a world he had no idea existed. A world where power wasn't something that could be bought or sold. A world where control wasn't about wealth, it was about strength, about resilience, about the ability to endure and survive when everything else was stacked against you. The two figures who had entered with the soldier stood silently by the door, their presence like a heavy weight pressing down on him. He had no way of knowing what they were capable of, or what role they played in the soldier's plan. But one thing was clear: he was no longer the one calling the shots. His palms were clammy as he reached for his phone, his fingers trembling. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. He had been the one in control. He had built everything from the ground up. He had climbed his way to the top of the corporate ladder. And yet, in the presence of this woman, everything he had fought for seemed so insignificant. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The soldier didn't answer immediately. She simply stepped closer to him, her eyes unwavering. It was as if she could see right through him, right through the mask he had so carefully constructed over the years. She wasn't impressed by his wealth. She wasn't swayed by his power. To her, he was just another man, another obstacle in her path. And that was what made her so dangerous. "Do you really want to know?" she asked, her tone not unkind, but with an edge that sent a shiver down his spine. The businessman swallowed hard, but he didn't back down. "Yes. I need to know." The soldier studied him for a long moment, her gaze piercing. Then, finally, she spoke. "I was once like you," she said, her voice steady, calm. "I had everything I needed: resources, power, influence. But I lost it all in an instant. My world was ripped away from me, and I had to learn to survive in ways I never thought possible. I became someone I never thought I'd be." The businessman's eyes narrowed. He had no idea what she was talking about, but there was a flicker of something in her words, a truth he couldn't quite grasp, but one that resonated deep inside him. "And now?" he asked, unable to help himself. "And now, I don't need anything from people like you," she said, her eyes narrowing as she spoke. "I've learned that true power doesn't come from money or status. It comes from something deeper. Something stronger." He didn't understand. What was she saying? She had power, yes, but it wasn't the kind of power he could recognize. It wasn't the power of the boardroom, the power of contracts and deals. It wasn't the power he had spent his entire life chasing. The businessman took a deep breath, trying to regain some sense of control. He reached for his phone once more, but the soldier was faster. Before he could even unlock it, she grabbed his wrist with a grip that was stronger than anything he had ever encountered. Her hand was like steel, unyielding, and he felt his pulse spike as he realized just how easily she could overpower him. "Don't make the mistake of thinking you can control me," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "You're not the one in charge here. Not anymore." Her words were like a cold slap to the face. The businessman's mind raced. He had been the one making the rules. He had been the one who controlled everything in his life. But now, faced with this soldier, he was nothing. She was the one who held the power, the one who had turned the tables. And no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't see a way out. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of frustration and fear. "What do you want from me?" he demanded again, his voice rising. The soldier didn't answer immediately. She merely looked at him, her expression unreadable. And for a moment, the businessman thought he saw something like pity in her eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the same unwavering determination. "What I want," she said, her voice cutting through the silence, "is for you to understand that you're not the one who calls the shots anymore. You've played the game, and now it's time for you to face the consequences." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had never been one to back down, never one to accept defeat. But in this moment, he realized that he had no choice. He had underestimated her. He had thought he could control her, break her down, dismiss her with the stroke of a pen. But he was wrong. And now, he would have to live with the fallout. The room was thick with tension, but it wasn't the kind of tension that could be cut by words alone. The businessman, still reeling from the unexpected turn of events, was beginning to grasp a bitter truth. This was no longer about a corporate decision, no longer about firing someone or keeping the upper hand. He had stumbled into something far deeper, something that wasn't just about contracts or office politics. It was about strength, real, raw strength, and it was a strength that had nothing to do with wealth or status. The soldier stood there, unwavering, her presence almost suffocating. Every movement she made seemed deliberate, calculated, as if she knew exactly how to command the space around her without even trying. Her eyes, cold and piercing, never left him, and for the first time, the businessman felt small. No amount of money or power could protect him now. In this moment, he was just a man, standing face to face with someone who had lived a life far more intense and challenging than his own. He was beginning to understand. She wasn't just a soldier. She was someone who had survived, who had fought for everything she had, not with the advantages he had enjoyed, but with sheer determination. And that made her infinitely more dangerous. "You don't get it, do you?" she asked, her voice calm, but with an edge that cut through the air like a blade. "You think this is just about firing a soldier, about asserting your power. But you're wrong." The businessman's jaw tightened. "What do you mean?" he asked, trying to push the unease aside, but his voice betrayed him. He didn't want to admit it, but he was starting to feel the weight of her words. "I've been through more than you'll ever know," she said, taking a step forward, her boots clicking softly against the floor. "I've seen things, endured things that would break a lesser person. I don't fight because I want to. I fight because I have to. And I've learned something along the way. Something you'll never understand, no matter how many zeros are on your paycheck. Her words hit him like a punch to the gut, knocking the air out of him. He had heard rumors, of course, rumors of her incredible strength, her unmatched skills in combat, her reputation as a soldier who was nearly unbeatable. But now, hearing her speak about her past, he began to understand the magnitude of her power. It wasn't just physical. It wasn't just about being a skilled fighter or a strategic mind on the battlefield. No, her power came from within, an unshakable resolve that no amount of wealth could break. You can fire me, she continued, her voice steady, unwavering, but you'll never take away what I've earned. You'll never take away my strength, my resilience, or my will to survive. Those are things that can't be bought. And those are things you'll never have, no matter how much you try. As the confrontation escalates, the atmosphere in the room becomes thick with tension. The businessman's once confident posture falters slightly as the soldier moves with precision and authority. Her actions are deliberate, and every word she speaks seems to carry weight far beyond the immediate situation. She's not just fighting for her career or for survival, she's fighting for something much deeper, a long-held sense of justice and the truth that's been buried under layers of deception. The businessman, used to being in control of every situation, finds himself caught off guard. He had thought that by firing her, he could erase her influence, eliminate the threat to his plans, and restore the order he had set in motion. But now, in the face of her unwavering resistance, he begins to realize how wrong he was. His first mistake was underestimating her. He thought of her as just another soldier, a tool to be discarded when no longer useful. He hadn't counted on the depth of her convictions, nor had he expected her to be so resourceful and unyielding. Her responses are sharp, calculated, each one chipping away at the foundation he's worked so hard to build. As she speaks, it's clear that she's not just reacting out of anger or frustration. There's a calmness to her fury, a quiet determination that makes the businessman uneasy. She knows exactly what he's trying to do, and she's making sure he understands the cost of underestimating her. It's a battle of minds now as much as it is a battle of willpower. The shift in power is palpable, like the tides turning slowly yet relentlessly. The businessman tries to regain control, barking orders and using his position to intimidate her, but she doesn't flinch. Instead, she takes a step back and analyzes the situation with a clear mind. Every word he utters is countered with a response that leaves him questioning his next move. She's been through much worse than this. She's faced battles, both physical and psychological, that would have broken most men. The businessman, on the other hand, has always been able to manipulate the world around him to his advantage. But in this moment, he's trapped by his own arrogance. For the first time in a long while, doubt creeps into his mind. Was firing her truly the right move? Could it be that he's overlooked something important? He tries to keep the facade of control, but the cracks are beginning to show. His voice, once strong, now carries a hint of uncertainty. The soldier sees this, and with a small but knowing smile, she presses on. Her words become sharper, more impactful. You thought you could just replace me, she says, her voice steady. But you can't replace someone like me. Not in this world. With each passing moment, the power dynamic shifts further, and the businessman feels his grip slipping. The soldier is no longer just fighting for her career, she's fighting for a cause much larger than herself. And in this battle, it's clear that she holds the upper hand. As the tension reaches its peak, the businessman is left questioning everything he thought he knew about power, control, and the true nature of strength. He begins to understand the soldier's quiet confidence, and it dawns on him, he never truly had control at all. The shift in power is complete. The tables have turned. The businessman is no longer the one holding the reins, and the soldier, once vulnerable, has become the one who holds the future in her hands. But just as the businessman begins to recognize the weight of his mistakes, something unexpected happens, something that will change the course of this confrontation forever. The story is far from over. As the room grows colder with the tension between them, the businessman, though shaken, tries to regain some semblance of control. He adjusts his suit and stands straighter, his mind racing, searching for any way to turn the situation in his favor. But it's no use. The soldier's steady gaze pierces through him, as if she can see all the way to the core of his being. A moment of silence hangs in the air, thick with anticipation. Then, without warning, the soldier speaks again. This time, her words carry a revelation that stops the businessman dead in his tracks. "You've been misled," she says, her voice soft but filled with authority. "Everything you think you know about me, it's a lie. And you've been living in the shadow of that lie for far too long." The businessman freezes, his eyes narrowing in confusion. What is she talking about? How could this woman, whom he thought he had figured out completely, possibly know something he didn't? He takes a step forward, his voice growing more desperate. "What are you trying to say? You think you can manipulate me with your cryptic words? I've seen everything, your history, your records. I know exactly who you are." The soldier shakes her head slowly, her eyes still fixed on him. "You don't know everything. In fact, you know almost nothing." The businessman's face twitches, frustration mixing with uncertainty. His mind races as he begins to question everything once again. He thought he understood her, her background, her career, the things that made her so feared. But now, with just a few words, she's made him doubt all of it. How could he have been so blind? Then, she continues, revealing the one truth he never expected to hear. "You've been chasing a ghost. The woman you think you fired isn't the woman you believe her to be. I'm not just a soldier. I'm something far more powerful than you could have ever imagined." The businessman stares at her, speechless. Her revelation shakes him to his core, and for a brief moment, he feels the weight of his decisions crashing down on him. Was it possible that everything he had based his decisions on, the information he had gathered, the assumptions he had made, was all wrong? His mind spins, trying to piece together the fragments of the soldier's words. The reality that she might not be who he thought, that she might have been playing him all along, is too much for him to process in one moment. A cold shiver runs down his spine as he begins to realize the depth of his mistake. "Who are you really?" he asks, his voice barely above a whisper, as if the question itself is too heavy to speak aloud. The soldier's lips curve into a small, knowing smile, but it's not one of victory. It's a smile that speaks of something much darker, a truth that has been hidden for far too long. She steps forward, closing the distance between them. Her presence seems to fill the room, and for a moment, the businessman is overwhelmed by her sheer intensity. "I am the reason your empire will fall," she says, her voice low and deliberate. "I am the one who will bring everything you've built to its knees. You tried to control me, tried to use me, but now, the tables have turned." The businessman's heart races as the weight of her words hits him. She isn't just any soldier. She's something far more dangerous, something he could never have prepared for. And as the truth unravels before him, he realizes that he's no longer the puppet master. He's the pawn in her game. His empire, his carefully constructed world, is now teetering on the brink of destruction. And all it took was one woman he thought he could control, who, it turns out, was the one controlling him all along. The power he once held is slipping away, piece by piece, and there's nothing he can do to stop it. His future, once bright and unchallenged, now seems uncertain and fragile. And the soldier, standing before him with quiet strength, is the one who holds all the cards. But just as the businessman begins to grasp the enormity of his situation, a new question arises in his mind, one that may change everything yet again. What is her true agenda? And more importantly, what will she do now that she has him exactly where she wants him? The stage is set for the final reckoning. The room is heavy with silence as the businessman stands there, his mind reeling from the revelation. Every fiber of his being wants to fight back, to regain control, but something deep inside him tells him that it's too late. He's been outsmarted, outplayed, and the consequences of his actions are now crashing down around him. He watches the soldier, who remains eerily calm and composed, her every movement calculated, her every word a deliberate strike. "What do you want from me?" the businessman finally asks, his voice a mix of disbelief and fear. His once assured tone has now been replaced with a crack in his confidence. The soldier stands still for a long moment, her gaze unwavering, and for a brief second, it almost feels like time has slowed. She doesn't need to rush. She has him where she wants him, and now, she's savoring the moment. The power dynamic has shifted irreversibly, and she holds all the answers, all the cards. "You think this is about revenge," she begins, her voice still calm, but there's a weight to her words now. "It's not. This is about justice. This is about exposing the truth. For too long, people like you have manipulated the system to work in your favor, without considering the lives you trample along the way. But that ends now." The businessman stares at her, trying to process the depth of her statement. He thought that she was just another cog in his well-oiled machine, a soldier to follow orders. But he was wrong. She's far more than that. And now, he's come to understand that his mistakes weren't just tactical errors, they were moral failures, failures that have finally caught up to him. The soldier takes a step forward, closing the gap between them, and every inch she moves feels like a step closer to the end of his empire. Her eyes lock with his, and for the first time, he sees her for who she truly is, not just a soldier, but a force of nature, an unstoppable force of justice. "You've used your position, your wealth, your power," she continues, "but in the end, it's not the power you hold in your hands that defines you. It's the choices you make. And you've made the wrong ones. You made the mistake of thinking you could control me. But now, you see that I control the outcome." The businessman swallows hard, the weight of her words settling deep into his chest. For the first time, he feels small, helpless in the face of the storm she's unleashed. His empire, the one he thought was indestructible, is now crumbling, piece by piece, and he realizes that the consequences of his actions will reverberate far beyond this room. The soldier's eyes soften slightly, as if she's seen enough of his suffering, and she takes a breath. This isn't about punishment. It's about righting the wrongs. And sometimes, the only way to make things right is to tear down what's broken and rebuild from the ground up. Her words cut through him like a blade. There's no anger in her voice, no sense of gloating. There's only the cold, hard truth. And it stings. He's spent so many years building an empire, only to have it dismantled by one woman's unshakable resolve. He's faced enemies before, rivals who tried to take him down, but this is something entirely different. He's facing not just an opponent, but the embodiment of all the mistakes he's made throughout his career. The realization begins to sink in. The empire he's built isn't just an empire of wealth and influence, it's an empire of lies. Lies that have affected countless lives. And now, all those lies are coming back to haunt him. The soldier's gaze never wavers, and the businessman finally finds his voice, albeit with a tinge of regret. "What happens now?" he asks, a question he already knows the answer to, but one that he's too afraid to face. "What happens now is the reckoning," the soldier replies. "Your empire, your name, everything you've built, it will crumble. But in its place, something new will rise. Something built on the principles of honesty, respect, and fairness. And those who have suffered will be given a chance to heal." There's a pause. The businessman stands, motionless, as the weight of her words settles over him like a blanket of cold reality. This isn't just the end of his reign, it's the beginning of something far bigger than him. And then, Just as it seems the final blow is about to be struck, she adds quietly, "You've already made your choice. Now, you must face the consequences." With that, the soldier turns and walks toward the door, her movements deliberate and unhurried. The businessman watches her, his mind racing, his world crashing down. He has no idea what the future holds, but one thing is certain: the consequences of his actions will follow him for the rest of his life. The door closes behind her, and the businessman is left alone, standing in the wreckage of his empire, facing the consequences of his decisions. As the dust begins to settle after the confrontation, the businessman is left with nothing but the weight of his actions. His empire, once a fortress of wealth and control, now stands in ruins. The walls that once protected him from scrutiny have crumbled, and the truth that was hidden so carefully is now laid bare for the world to see. The soldier, having delivered her final message, walks away from the scene with quiet dignity. She doesn't need to gloat. She's already won. Her victory isn't one of physical dominance or tactical brilliance, it's a victory of integrity and unwavering moral strength. She has exposed the truth, and with it, shattered the illusion of power the businessman had spent his entire life cultivating. The businessman watches her leave, his mind still spinning. He thought he had all the answers. He thought he understood how the world worked, how to control it, manipulate it to his will. But in the end, he was wrong. He underestimated not just the soldier, but the very idea of justice itself. Now, standing alone in the aftermath, he's forced to reckon with the consequences of his choices. No longer able to hide behind wealth or influence, he faces the cold reality that the true measure of a person's strength isn't found in the power they wield, but in the integrity they maintain, the choices they make in the face of adversity. The life lesson, though hard-earned, is clear: true strength lies not in domination or control, but in the courage to confront one's own flaws, the humility to acknowledge one's mistakes, and the wisdom to change when given the chance. As he watches the soldier disappear into the distance, a sense of realization washes over him. The battle may have been lost, but the war isn't over. He still has time to rebuild, time to make things right, not through force or manipulation, but through self-reflection, honesty, and redemption. And though he may never regain the power he once had, there's a new kind of strength that he begins to understand, a strength built not on domination, but on character. In the end, the businessman learns that true success isn't measured by the wealth you accumulate, the power you hold, or the empire you build. It's measured by how you treat others, the integrity you live by, and the courage to face the truth, no matter how painful. The story ends not with a traditional victory, but with the quiet, profound realization that the greatest battle one can ever fight is the one against their own inner flaws. And in that battle, victory isn't defined by winning, it's defined by growing, changing, and learning to make the right choices when it matters most.